Hi guys, gonna get started, so if you wanna come sit your ass down. This was originally gonna be just for the instructors here at Elsinore, but it's kind of grown into something else. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna blast through a lot of the technical stuff. There's a lot of technical stuff in this particular PowerPoint with math and stuff. I'm just gonna blow through it because I don't think it's really that germane. If you want, we'll come back to it when you have some questions a little bit later on. But I just as soon blow through that part of it a little bit more quickly if we can. I have a couple books out on HD in case you weren't aware. One of them is called The Full HD. It's a book that explains pretty well everything you'd ever want to know about HD. So I want to talk about what HD is. HD comes in two flavors and only two flavors. It's either 1280 by 720 resolution picture or 1920 by 1080 picture at display. So when you hear this term True HD, which a lot of the manufacturers are putting on their cameras, you can pick up any 1920 camcorder and it'll say True HD on it. What that means is it's delivering a 1920 picture. It's a marketing term. It doesn't mean anything. Occasionally I'll get a guy come up to me on the drop zone and go, I got a True HD camera. Well, that doesn't mean anything. All it means is it delivers a 1920 1080 picture. That's it. It doesn't mean anything special. We'll look at some of the cameras here in just a little bit. Anyway, but not all the cameras record. Capture means record. So not all cameras record the official image size, particularly in HD. For instance, AVC HD camcorders, which a lot of you have, like the CX100, CX110, CX500, etc. The older camcorders, like the CX7, CX12, they record a 1440 by 1080 image. I only bring this up because you need to know that what it records is different than what it plays out. And that matters because if you're using a computer-based system, some computer systems aren't smart enough to look at the 1440 by 1080 picture and understand that it needs to be turned into a 1920 picture. I'll explain how that works in just a second, but I want you to know that there's a difference between what's recorded and what's actually output. If you have an HDV camcorder like the CX5, or excuse me, the HC5, HC9, this is a really popular camera. All HDV is 1440. It's not a full 1900 pixels. So, and where that number comes from, if you don't know what that number relates to, it means it's 1,900 pixels across this way and 1,080 pixels down that way. So 1920 by 1080. That's all that means. Here's how we talk about video signals. Just if somebody says I'm shooting 1080i, you might hear that, or for everyone here on the drop zone that's got an HD camcorder, if it's a CX100, a CX7, CX500, CX150, whatever, these new cameras, or if you got a GoPro, that signal is a 1080i image. We call it 1080-60i, but you can just say 1080i. That means it's an interlaced picture. You don't need to know exactly what that means. If you want to know, ask me when we get to the questions part. 720p, there are no cameras that shoot 720p that are useful in the skydiving world, not one. So we're not even going to worry about 720p in the skydiving world. There's a couple of high-end broadcast cameras that shoot 720p, but in the skydiving world, it's not a concern. I only put this slide in because a couple weeks ago, I had somebody ask me about a JVC camera that they wanted to use for skydiving. JVC makes a 720p camera, but it's not usable, or rather it's not really that useful for skydiving for two reasons. Number one, the consumer camcorders that JVC and Canon and Panasonic make aren't generally suitable for skydiving because of their image stabilization system. And moreover, most displays today are 1920 displays. For those of you guys that have got high-def displays in your homes, they're probably 1920 displays. 1080. 1080, again, we refer to the image as being a 1080 image. 1080i, 1080p. What's the difference? Is it a 1080 interlaced picture? In other words, does it use two different signals to create a solid picture? Or is it a progressive scanned image, which means it's one solid image? The easiest way to explain the difference between interlaced and progressive without getting into a whole lot of silliness is that back in the day when television first came out, there wasn't enough voltage to be able to send a solid picture across the television screen. So a guy named Philo Farnsworth came up with the idea of splitting the picture into two halves. One half has little fields in it, the other half has odd-numbered little fields in it. The even-numbered fields and the odd-numbered fields combine to create a solid image. The reason this was important was because it allowed us to send really big pictures across the air, reassemble them in the TV, and make a solid picture. We still use that technology today. But the computer world is all progressive scanned content. In other words, it's one solid picture. Why is it important for you to know this? You guys ever put a piece of video from your camcorder into your computer, played it on your computer, and noticed little lines that appear in there? They look like little sawtooth lines. It's because you're seeing an interlaced picture on a progressive scan display. All computer displays are progressive scan, all of them. So the next question comes up, why aren't all cameras now progressive scan? Because we have to use computers for most of our work. Because progressive scanned images use a lot of bandwidth, they use a lot of memory, they use a lot of speed, or they require a lot of speed. And most of these inexpensive camcorders don't have the speed built in to write progressive information down to these little flash cards. It's just not there. That's one reason. Number two is that we still need interlace technology for broadcast. Most broadcast still uses interlace technology, and so we're still using this kind of a camera. We're almost to the fun stuff. HD is only widescreen. There's no such thing as square HD. It doesn't, 4:3 HD doesn't exist. Never has, never will. So it's always 16:9. Just when you thought we got rid of letterboxing, when you went and bought a nice widescreen display, the industry went to Academy. That means now you have still yet a narrow picture with widescreen letterboxing bars on the top. But all HD is a widescreen image. All right, here's where we start getting into the meat of some of this stuff. All of these cameras, every one of them, have something built into them called an imager. And the imagers are different sizes. Some of the images that we find are as small as, we're looking at 3/16 of an inch on something this small. Really, really tiny imager. We step up to some of these. These have got a 1/4 inch imager on them. They're still really quite small. They're just about the size of the fingernail on your pinky finger. They're really tiny. Some of the mid-level camcorders that are out there, like this one, you're looking at a 5/8 inch chip. So it's, excuse me, a 3/8 inch chip. So it's really quite small. Then we step up to something like this. This has a 1/2 inch imager, so it's a very large imager by comparison. So what does the imager have to do with anything, and why am I even bringing it up? Because all these cameras record a 1920 by 1080 image. In other words, they have 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels on them, right? Everybody with me so far? Okay. If the imagers are small, those pixels are really tight together. If the imager is big, then the pixels are a little farther apart. What does that mean? Well, it means that if the imager is really small, it has bad low light capability. So for those of you that are shooting with, say, something like the little GoPro or the Contours, you've seen in the aircraft, they look like crap. They're dark, they're grainy, there's lots of noise inside the airplane and so forth. That's because the camera is adding some gain. It's adding some volume. Video gain and volume are the same thing. It's adding some volume to the picture to try and give you more color and more light in the image. Does that make sense? The imager is so small, those pixels are crammed so tight together, light can't get in between the pixels. So when we move up to a bigger camera, such as the CX100s or CX110s or 500s, etc., they have a larger imager, so in the plane they're nice and clean because the pixels aren't crammed quite so close together. Then when you start getting into some of these larger style cameras like I just showed, the space is really nice, and so we can shoot in dark conditions. We don't need any light at all. So some of you have seen the light that I wear in my helmet. This is the one that normally is on the front of my helmet. The reason I use a light like this is because it gives me an awful lot of fill when I'm in the aircraft or when I'm on a cloudy day so that I can fill in those noisy spots in my pictures. And that's why I use something like this. All right, I've already talked about interlace, so I'm going to blow through this because I want to get more to questions than anything else. Codecs. This is the most important thing that we can talk about. All of these cameras use different types of codecs. The word codec comes from compression, decompression. Codec is the codec is the most important part of anything that we deal with. You guys aren't really aware of codecs more than likely, but you deal with them every day in your life. If you go to YouTube, if you go to Vimeo, if you're going to some of these different sites, you're viewing video in what's called the Flash codec. If you've probably heard a little bit about Flash. All of those sites take whatever video you upload, whether it's a WMV, which is the Windows Media Video file, WMV, that's a codec. Or maybe you're uploading MPEG-4, that's a codec. Maybe you're uploading MPEG-2, that's a codec. Maybe you're uploading an AVI file, which isn't a codec. AVI is like a paper bag from the grocery store, and it can contain anything you want to put into it. Same thing with a QuickTime file, a MOV, a .mov file. That's just a paper bag, and that paper bag can contain an MP4 or an MP2 or, geez, I'm just trying to think of all the file names that start coming into my head, or file types. It can contain a red video stream. It can contain a lot of different kinds of codecs inside that paper bag. It might have MP3 for audio. So that bag can hold a lot of things. So whenever you say QuickTime, or MOV, or you say an AVI, those two things are just paper bags that hold stuff. Make sense? The reason the compression is important is because what it does is it allows us to take these great big monstrous pictures and drop them down into a size that we can record on camera helmets or in small format camcorders and upload to YouTube or these other places. So I want to explain to you a little bit about how the compression system works, because it's kind of magical, but it's important that you understand it, because when you get into the editing phase of your video, you'll get an idea of how some of this works. All right, so bitrate reduction. What we have to do is reduce the size of the picture. So we're going to take a standard camera like that larger camera that I just showed you there. It's a Z1U. It's a 1080 camcorder, but it records, remember I said it can record 1440 pixels by 1080 pixels. Just by reducing the amount of recorded pixel data from 1920 down to 1440 pixels, we have reduced the size of the picture by 25%, just in recording less information. Make sense so far? We're not compressing anything yet. All we're doing is reducing the number of pixels that are actually being recorded. We're going to change the shape of them a little bit, but it's not really germane. So once we reduce the amount of the number of pixels that are being recorded in the stream, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the color. The human eye is really, really weak. We don't see anywhere near the number of colors that are out there. We perceive two things only. We perceive light and we perceive color, and that's it. Which are we more sensitive to? Light, by far. Light by far. For instance, what color is my hand right here, or my shirt? He says blue, he says white. Okay, white, we'll say it's white. Okay. What about when I put my shirt up here? Now what color is my shirt? Still white, but our eye perceives it as blue. We will perceive what we want to perceive, how we think we need to perceive things. If you've got an iPod, you know that we can take audio files and turn them into really horrible sounding sound files by reducing the amount of information in the audio stream, but it still sounds pretty good, because it works on the perception of the human ear. Well, the human ear is a lot more sensitive than the eye. So we're going to actually drop the color information by a whole nother third by taking some of the color out. I'll explain how that works in just a second. Anyway, what happens is now we've reduced the picture to 50% of the original size. We've taken a large picture and we've cut it by half, and we haven't applied any compression. I'm going to try and get through compression really easily or quickly here, because it's kind of complex. There's two kinds of compression. There's lossless compression. Everybody knows about lossless compression. Everybody's used a zip file or a sit file, right? That's lossless compression. Problem is, with video, lossless compression doesn't work really well because there's so much data there. There's very little redundant data, so it doesn't compress really well. Where like with a doc file, it just goes through and says, oh, there's 1,000 periods, there's 1,000 thes, so we're just going to make a little symbol that represents a period or represents a the, and we're going to throw all the extra thes and all the extra periods out of the document, and it can squish it down pretty well. Well, that's effectively how lossless works. Then we can get into uncompressed media. I hear this almost every day on the drop zone. Somebody says, I'm working with uncompressed DV. There's no such thing. Saying you're working with uncompressed DV is like saying you're riding a three-wheeled bicycle. It doesn't work. There's no such thing as uncompressed DV. Every form of video that every one of us in this room are using, for the most part, unless you're dealing with the very large broadcast format cameras like you've seen around here from time to time, you're all dealing with compressed, highly compressed data, everyone. So uncompressed doesn't really fit into our discussion here, but I want to bring it up just because I hear this from a lot of different people. So then we're going to talk about compression. There's two types of compression. One is called intra-frame compression and then inter-frame compression. Intra-frame compression means that each picture is compressed within its own frame. JPEGs are an intra-frame type of an image. In other words, all the data is squished into that one frame or into that one picture. So if you can think of video as being a series of 30 JPEGs a second, that puts us here into this intra-frame world. Then we're going to talk, but this is the one I want to talk about, inter-frame, and there's a reason this is really important. Skip all this stuff. MPEG-2, H.264, which is also known as MPEG-4, which is also known as AVC-HD, is an inter-frame compression scheme. HDV also uses MPEG-2. We're going to call this, for the discussion, we'll call this long GOP. Doesn't have anything to do with the Republicans. It means group of pictures. A long group of pictures. Let me speed through it and go to a group of pictures. You don't care about the math. You,
Yeah, if you go back to that screen.
you want to get to? You want to look at it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Math looks a little fuzzy.
Real quick, then there are other formats that we can talk about: MPEG-4 AVC-HD, JPEG 2000, AVC-I, which is something that we'll probably never see in skydiving. RED, which is a lot of people talk about RED cameras. I hear from somebody in skydiving about the RED at least once a week. Oh, this dude's got a RED. It's the greatest HD camera ever. RED is not HD. RED is 2K or 4K. It doesn't fit into the world of HD, and so it really doesn't fit into this discussion. Same thing with SI2K. That's a Silicon Imaging 2K. That's not an HD camcorder. It's a 2K camcorder. It's the next level up. HD is actually already dead in the video world. You guys just don't know it yet. It's over. We're so over HD. It's crazy. We're working in 2K resolutions and 4K resolutions, and oh my God, some of you will be around in about another 15 or 20 years when we start stepping up to 10K resolutions. Scary times. Really big pictures. Crisp, crystal clear pictures that can record things that our eyes are incapable of seeing. We just see great stuff. King Kong was the first 4K picture, full 4K picture if you're interested in the technology. Batman, 4K picture. Star Trek, 4K picture, all filmed with the RED camera. And then there's one called the Genesis, which is another image. Okay, let's talk about bitrate for a second. This takes us down and gives us an idea of how we're going to deal with 1080i uncompressed data rate. To play back uncompressed HD, we need 140 megabytes per second, depending on what kind of image we're dealing with. Here we're dealing with 1440. We need 140 megabytes per second. That's not megabits, that's megabytes. That's the easiest way to say that is that's one big ass pipe. But if we're dealing with uncompressed 10-bit instead of 8-bit, see, this is where we start getting into all different kinds of things. If we're dealing with uncompressed 10-bit and we're dealing with 1920, we're all of a sudden talking 660 megabytes per second. That's a big ass data pipe. It's just simply not efficient on laptops and small cameras. Remember earlier I said that for this kind of stuff, we can't easily write down to a small card because of the sheer volume of information we're writing down. If you're dealing with say a Genesis camera or a Viper camera, and you'll never see these in skydiving, but I'll tell you about them. They're high-end production cameras. Superman, the last Superman was shot on the Viper. That camera is so large that it requires two SDI, serial digital interfaces, that feed out to a triac system that has a hard drive bank for each color, red, green, and blue. The pipe is ridiculous. You're using gigabytes per second in storage. It's just phenomenal, the amount of data that has to be stored. All right, let me move forward because I don't want to spend a lot of time on the map. AVC-HD. This drop zone is moving to an AVC-HD based recording format. It's going to be the format that we'll be editing on this drop zone in the future. A lot of drop zones around the United States, actually around the world, have gone to an AVC-HD based recording format. AVC-HD stands for Advanced Video Codec High Definition. There are AVC cameras and there are AVC-HD cameras. AVC-HD is owned exclusively by Sony and Panasonic. It was a joint venture between the two companies. The little GoPros that we're dealing with, for instance, those are AVC cameras. They're not AVC-HD cameras. So some of you might own a little GoPro camera, but all of a sudden you find that you can't import that data stream into your computer because maybe you don't have the codec. Mark was asking me about codecs earlier tonight. Maybe you can't read the AVC codec, but all computers can read the AVC-HD codec. Does this make sense? The difference is just in the file structure. We'll talk about that in a minute. But AVC HD is basically the same thing as MPEG-2, or rather it's a little brother to MPEG-2. It's known as MPEG-4, Part 10. It's also known as H.264. Why does it have so many names? In the telecom world, that, for instance, those of you that had original iPhones and that kind of a thing, you could record a little video on your phone. It recorded what was called an H.264 stream. Okay? And in the professional video world, we had this thing called MPEG-4 Part 10 to go along with what we already knew as MPEG-2, just the next generation of MPEG-2. Well, as Sony and Panasonic were developing this new joint codec, they knew that they needed to come up with something, because imagine your grandma walking into Walmart and saying, I want to buy an H.264 camera, or I want to buy an MPEG-4 part camera. It's just not going to work. So they need to come up with a name that made some sense. And that's where AVC HD came from, is from that. Okay, it has a compression ratio as high as 44:1, so in other words, for every 1 bit of information, it compresses it 44 times. That's why we're able to squeeze so much data down onto a little thing. Now I say as high, that doesn't mean it's always that high, it just means it can go that high. The amount of compression is based upon the amount of information that's in the stream, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Delivery bit rates as high as 24 megabits per second. If it's coming in off the disk itself, it can't go higher than 18 megabits. Batman, if you saw the HD or the Blu-ray version of Batman, it's at 18 megabits. AVC HD is the new DV. That's the easiest way to explain it. AVC HD has become the new DV. It's the consumer-friendly, professional bridge that works between the mid-level professional and the low-end consumer. It works really well. And actually, I need to take this line out. It was extremely difficult to edit, and if you've got an older computer, it still is extremely difficult to edit. This is an older MacBook Pro. It's a 1.83 gig processor, so it's kind of old. It's a bitch to edit large AVC HD streams in. But if you have one of the newer computers, the video cards have AVC HD decoders built into the video cards, plus the CPUs, the processors, have AVC HD decoding built into them as well. So it's really not that hard to edit AVC HD on more modern computers. This sucker's 4 years old, so it's been around for a while. HDV, I'm just going to talk about quickly. Is anybody here using HDV at all? Anybody using tape-based? Anybody planning on using it?
Actually going from to AVC HD.
So you went from HDV to AVC HD. Okay. Yeah. Was it what made you change? Just curious, out of curiosity.
Drop Zone changing its format. I'm actually just coming on board this year, so I just.
So because the drop zone changed its format. Okay.
That and actually I'm tired of tape.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's the main reason right there that a lot of people are moving from HDV to AVC HD is you're going from tape-based to file-based. With tape-based, if you've got an hour's worth of recorded content, it takes 1 hour to get into the computer. With file-based, it takes about 11 minutes to transfer that same 1 hour. Very, very fast. And it's going to speed up even faster.
Plus search and sort and find. It's going to be so much easier to find.
It's easier to find files and so forth, correct. I don't need to get, well, you know what, we'll get, just to give you an idea of what's here, why HD is so cool. This is what we watched when we were growing up. This is the standard of the video industry until a couple of years ago. And this is what we get to watch today. Big difference. And it's not, you know, in this case, bigger is better. All right. So here I've got, and it's kind of hard to see because of the wall, but here's an image that was shot at the same time with a camera that's capable of shooting 2 formats at once. This is HD, this is DV. And you can see that this is got no detail, no definition, very little contrast in the picture. And look at the shot over there. It's quite a little different. I'll move the projector just a little bit so you don't see the glare in quite the same place. Does that help? Quite a bit of difference between the two. And these are and this is actually shrunk down. It looks better at full size. And this one is also shrunk down just to fit it into the slide. But it gives you an idea of the difference in the image between the two. Okay, real quick, again, coming back to that full HD, true HD thing, sometimes people will say that HDV or AVC HD aren't true HD. I especially hear this from guys that think they know a lot about video, or television cameramen that think they know a lot about video, and they'll come in and say, well, you're not shooting real HD, you're shooting that AVC stuff. There's a spec. If it meets the spec, it's the real deal. And so this is just my way of saying if it meets the spec, it's the real deal. And all of these cameras, whether we're talking about something like this, all the way to something like this, all the way to some of my big broadcast cameras you've maybe seen, they're all true, real, full, whatever you want to call it, HD. The quality might be different between all of them. Sure it is. I mean, you're talking about $300 versus $10,000. Of course it's going to be different. But they are all full, true, whatever you want to call it, HD streams. All right. Okay, here's, I put the slide in because I want you guys to understand how MPEG works, regardless of what flavor of MPEG it is. MPEG works around redundant information. Remember earlier I said that the data rate could go as high as 24 megabits per second, but it might not necessarily have to go that high. That's because the system looks at what are called redundant pixels, or in other words, pixels that exist in other places. So here we have a car driving across the street, pretty easy to see. What's changing from this picture to this picture? Almost nothing, just the position of the car, right? So instead of redrawing all the green, all the gray, all the blue, all the whatever we have here, the yellow, it only needs to focus in on one thing, the car. So it only has to focus on the pixels that are changing. Therefore, the data rate doesn't have to be as high because only certain things changed in the picture. Make sense? Okay. So what it does is it just keeps looking back and forth at the different parts of the picture. That's all. I bored them to tears, sorry. Here's a little better picture to explain how that works. Okay. The sky, effectively one color of blue. So all it has to do is draw one pixel and then say, repeat this blue however many times. On the other hand, if you look at the detail in her jumpsuit, look at all the grades that there are of pink and white and I guess you call it gray that are in there. So it has to work a lot harder to reproduce the information in her jumpsuit here than it has to do to reproduce the sky. Make sense?
So we should all wear black jumpsuits.
Pardon?
We should all wear black jumpsuits.
Yeah, let's just wear black jumpsuits. That works. Except problem is there's gradients of black too. So we're still hosed. Do you guys want to know about color space? I didn't think so. Let me just blow through it real quick. These are all the different color spaces. All you need to know is MPEG-2 and MPEG-4 use what's called 420 AVC-HD. So this is all you need to know is this. Why do you need to know that? Because when you're doing color processing, if you do color processing on your video, you're going to want to know what color space is coming from. The rest of it doesn't matter. Quick explanation still about the MPEG. I talked about frame draws. Next thing changes. So we have three types of frames, I, B, and P. I stands for the intraframe. Then we have the predictive frame, and then the bidirectional predictive frame. So what happens is it takes an I-frame. An I-frame is the full frame. It's the whole picture. Remember, we looked at the image with the car? That's the whole picture. Okay, the next frame is a bidirectional predictive frame. It's going to look forward in time. It's going to look backward in time. It's going to look at another bidirectional predictive frame. It's going to look forward in time, backward in time. It draws a predictive frame, forward in time, backward in time, but this one is a cross-check to these, and these are cross-checks to this. Just a way of saying, remember that game Telephone you played when you were kids? You'd whisper something in some guy's ear, and they'd whisper it to the next person's ear, and then they'd whisper it to the next person's ear. Okay. What this system does is it prevents the game of telephone from occurring. This is the original speaker. Okay. What ends up happening is the next original speaker is clear down there, but the first person says it to this guy. Well, this guy then says to this guy, what did you hear? This guy says, what did you say? What did you hear? What did you say? It's just going back and forth. So you're assured an integrity of signal flow from start to finish. Why is this important? Because what ends up happening is if we're dealing with high-speed things, if we're in the sky as videographers and we don't have good videography skills or good skills at being able to get in front of the tandem or get on top of the four-way or whatever else, we're zooming all over the sky and we've got this solid object that's down below us. It's got lots of movement in it. We've got lots of movement as we're moving across the sky. What ends up happening is it can become information overload because the camera's going, what did you say? What did you say? What did you see? What did you say? What did you say? What did you see? So we can start getting pictures that might block up or the colors might get washed out. Depends on the camera that we're using in terms of how it deals with messy information. The best picture is one that doesn't move. And in skydiving, your brain immediately goes, well, but all of it moves. Actually, it doesn't, because we're moving in relativity to our subject. So things really don't move that much, right? Very few things change. The guys that have a bear of a time are the guys that are doing proximity flying with cliffs, because the cliff's always moving. But for the kind of work that most of us are doing as skydivers, especially the tandem guys, the more still you can bring your body, the more smoothly you can fly, the better your picture will always be, because now you've got this solid thing in front of you, and the movement is actually quite minimal. A little bit of hair and some cloth, but really not that much is moving. Lots of sky, solid clouds, whatever, but that stuff's not moving. So for the guy that's zooming in and zooming back out and not able to hold his position, he's not going to have as clean and clear a video as the guy that's able to just fly in and park that. You're an ex-videographer, Mike. We're not...
He's trying to damper it in again.
2 hours of tunnel time, you'll be there. Whatever you can do. The bottom line is learn how to fly your slot and park, because you'll get a better picture if you do. And now you understand how that stuff works. Audio is always compressed in AVC HD, always. I want to talk about imagers really, really quickly, because we're dealing with lots of imagers. These cameras that we're using all have very small imagers. Most of them have what's called a CMOS imager built into them. CMOS is a, in terms of its use, a relatively new type of imager that's out there. CMOS imagers have been around since the very beginning of time, but why do I even talk about them? Because in the past, we've only used them in cell phones and scanners and really cheap low-end stuff, but the technology has become now that we can move CMOS into higher professional cameras. So for instance, if you've got a CX110, CX100, etc., those cameras have the same imager in them as this large broadcast camera. It's just they're small. It's called Exmor technology. It's a newer technology, and this camera is called the EX. This uses Exmor technology as a broadcast camera. These new small cameras use the exact same technology, and that's why they can give us a little cleaner, better picture. It's like everything else, you know, time goes by, things get smaller, things become more efficient. But what you want to know is you want to have the largest imager that your money can buy. And this is, you guys hear me talk about the GoPros are okay for what they are. Well, it's because they've got this little micro imager and they're cheap. They're mass producible, really cheap. The CX100 has a much larger image sensor in it. Therefore, it can gather more light, it can handle more data that's coming into it. It can process through the Bayer filter a lot more information, a lot more cleanly, a lot more quickly, and most importantly, a lot more accurately than these little contours or the GoPros. GoPros are great for what they are. I mean, they're bottom-end camera and they do a really fine job as long as there's lots of light.
Do you think it will get to the point that GoPros will become the mainstream in the industry?
God, I hope not. Question is, will GoPros become mainstream from the industry? And I answer that just from the perspective of, you know what? Let me hold that thought. I'll give you my thoughts on.
I just bought a CX100. I mean,
Yeah, I hope not. Here's a benefit of CMOS, especially for us as skydivers. If you ever worked with CCDs, like you had a PC-109 or something like that, if you ever went to the sun, you saw this great big smear, right? You'll never see that with CMOS because of the way CMOS works. CMOS works a lot more like the eye works in terms of how it interprets data. So there's no smear in CMOS. It's one of the really cool things about it. It also can process huge amounts of data. Oh, one really cool thing about a CMOS image I didn't mention to you. Let me go back to this. On the imager are all these little pixels, you know, all these little lines, these little squares you see right there. If a pixel goes dead in a CMOS imager, have you ever had a pixel die in your CCD camera where just a little dot, blank dot, just black? It happens sometimes. With CMOS, each one of those dots has a physical address, kind of like a URL. And the camera can go in and say, oh, that guy's dead. Let's take the pixels that surround that one and add more to their workload. And so if you take any one of these and you look at in a block of 6, you look at the 5 remaining pixels that surround the dead pixel, they can all pick up the load. So we don't have an issue with dead pixels anymore like we used to have. And in the higher end cameras, you can actually tweak what the pixels do. You can do some fun things with them. So that's another advantage of the CMOS stuff. All right, let's move on. This was kind of an interesting image. This was taken with a CX7 camcorder. But the reason I use this picture to show how cool it is look at the fine detail. If you don't know what this is, it's a tattoo needle gun. Look at the very fine detail that's on here, and this thing's moving 120 revolutions a minute. So it's got lots of high motion, but look how clean the detail is. It's able to handle really high motion as long as things are fairly redundant.
This is a still taken off of
This is still taken off the camera, yeah. We'll get into editing stuff in just a second. I'm almost done with this crap. Talk about lenses for a minute. Lenses are probably the #1 question I get on a daily basis as a moderator on dropzone.com. I get asked about lenses all the time. And I'm stunned that people don't get it. Okay, let's see. There we go. All right, so you can go out and you can buy all kinds of lenses. You've probably seen this one before. This is a cheap little Sony brand lens that you can get in the yellow card at Best Buy. It costs you about 69 bucks. It's completely worthless for HD.
Nice shot.
Completely, yeah, no, I should try it for the Lakers, huh? Useless. It's a piece of crap. If you put a standard definition lens on the front of a high definition camcorder, you now have less than a standard definition camcorder to some extent. Why? Because lenses are designed to be matched up to what we call micro image or macro imagers. Some of you maybe have seen the article that I wrote about this, but the bottom line is the distance that occurs let's see, there we go. These cameras are very efficient because there is a set distance that takes place from the front of the lens to where the imager is. They are matched up. The lens is designed specifically for that imager. They're peanut butter and jam. They go together wonderfully. They're made that way. All of a sudden we go throwing an adapter, a wide angle adapter on. We've now changed the relationship between the optics and the imager, right? Okay, well, if we get lenses that aren't designed for high definition and aren't specifically designed for macro imaging, what happens is we lose our picture quality. It just goes right out the door. And we're actually worse off than if we just had a standard definition camcorder in the first place. We start getting reds that will bleed like crazy, or we get aberration around the edges of the image. You can start seeing things falling apart. So what I did here is, you can't really tell because it's projected, but here I took a 0.55 image, and then here's a 0.5 lens alone, and I mixed them together just kind of really for the fun of it. You can see how you start seeing vignetting that's happening here, and you look how the detailing in the image starts falling apart as we reach the edge, and I don't have quite as much, but look how the detail is much better here than it is right here. Things hold together much better. Because we're dealing with something designed to work within its range. I did this actually because some guy on dropzone.com asked me, well, why can't you combine these two things? And my argument was, why would you want to? I mean, I don't know, let's find out. And we found out, and it's obviously a very useless image. Everything's very distorted. These are all 0.5 lenses. I want to give you my personal opinion about lenses for what it's worth. 0.3 lenses are for inside video if you're free flying, or you're inside of a group and you're flying really close to people, but in my opinion they don't belong anywhere in tandems. That's my opinion. It's not a rule. 0.5 lenses are what you should be using when you're doing tandems in four-way.
About 0.45.
You're not going to find a 0.45 in the modern world. 0.45 would be just fine, but again, there are no HD lenses that are 0.45. So I'm going to stick with what is available in HD right now, and that would be 0.3s and 0.5s and 0.55s, and that's it. There's nothing else that resolves that big of an image. The reason I don't like 0.3s being used for tandems is because you have to fly so close to get the image that what ends up happening is now all of a sudden the student's got a nose that's this wide. We're digital storytellers. We're telling the story about their experience. You're not trying to show how frickin' close you can fly to the tandem. That's not cool. You're telling the story of their skydive experience. It's about them. It's not about you. not about the fact that you're a cheap ass and you only want to own one lens and you like free flying with your buddies on Friday and Sunday, but Saturday you have to do tandem fill-in work. If you're going to do the work, think about things from the perspective of the person you're shooting, because it's about them, it's not about you. There's my opinion, there's my lecture on that stuff. But 0.3 is for inside, 0.5 for outside. So the guys that are running around with these great, oh there we go, these great big ass Optica lenses like this, I see these all over the drop zone. They're really cool lenses for free flying on the inside. They really look great. You're flying, sit flying or head down next to somebody, they're awesome. But for tandem, they just make your student look ugly ass. And that's not, excuse my French, but that's not what we're here to do, you know? We want people to remember their time and have a really great time. And I'll get to a couple, I'll get to a difference of images here next. Thank you. Hang on. Okay, hang on, I'll get to it. So up here is a 0.5. There's the plane at about the same place with a 0.3. This is with the, in fact, I shot these two with these two cameras. So the 0.5 is this Century here, and the 0.3 is this Century here. If I should have done this with a tandem, but I just was too lazy. But you can see I'm at approximately the same focal point. Plane's at approximately the same altitude off the ground. Look at how much better the 0.5 is. It's sharper, it's cleaner. This is still an HD lens, but look at the distortion it's applying just to the airplane and to the earth. That's what you're doing to people's faces. Do you see where my opinion comes from?
Well, there's the safety side of it too. The closer the video guy is, the more chance of a collision. The student opens a can.
Yeah, you know, there's a safety discussion about, you're right, if you use that too wide of a lens, it means you got to fly too close, or you might be flying too close, and it increases the opportunity for a collision. There's no doubt about that. I'm not here to be a safety cop. My point is simply that we make, as tandem guys, we make our customers look ugly when we use those big lenses, because, or the wide lenses like that, because we have to fly so close. I mean, come on. You know, the worst one, it looks best in a 0.5, but in a 0.3, when you get down there and you're looking up at the student and you're looking up at so the drogue is in the frame, what ends up happening is, because of where the drogue sits, the drogue will spread across the top of the image and it becomes an eye catcher, it becomes a focal point. And then you got the student's nose, because you're there and you're looking right up their nose and their nostrils look like they're horse nostrils. They're just huge. Come on, nobody likes that, right? All right, I'm going to show you one last thing, and then we'll open up for questions and we'll be done. Let me jump to image stabilization really quickly. I get a lot of questions about the different cameras and what they do, and the things that are relevant to skydiving. All cameras, for the most part, have image stabilization. The GoPros have no image stabilization for obvious reasons. They're super bottom end, and they're what they are. All camcorders, for the most part, though, do have image stabilization of some sort. They need to, especially when we're dealing with really wide lens subjects. We need stabilization for the super long lenses, the long focal lengths. But even for the wide stuff, when we're dealing with high motion or an unstable platform, we need to have image stabilization. The two types of image stabilization that are out there, or I should say the three types of image stabilization out there, are no image stabilization, i.e. GoPro Contour. The other is what's called EIS, or electronic image stabilization, and the third is called optical image stabilization, OIS. OIS, as a general rule, is not suitable for skydiving at all, because the platform is so unstable that the way that OIS works is you have a lens, and the lens has little gimbal points or magnetos, or there's a variety of different mechanisms through which this works. But we have two lenses that rotate back and forth with each other, or that they move back and forth and so forth, so that they can keep the image stable, right? It makes sense? You have two floating lenses. Most systems, even when you turn the optical image stabilization system off, those lenses are still free floating. They're not locked into place. A couple of years ago, we'd actually have to open these cameras up, take a drop of crazy glue, and crazy glue these down. Pain in the ass. The easier answer is to just stay away from it. So this camera has what's called EIS. This camera has what's OIS. I had the opportunity to compare the two. you're looking at a $350 camera versus a $1,350 camera. So price range is quite different. I'm gonna roll this through. It's all free flying. The thing I want you to look for is not as much looking at the subject as you look at the background. What's going on behind in the background of the skydive, because that's where you'll see the camera fail, is in the background. It's not huge, but that's because this particular flyer just happens to be really quite good at what he's doing. And no, I'm not the flyer. I'm actually the guy in the doorway right now. Look at the color difference.
The ground's all blurry on the phone.
Okay, so for the moment, this looks like it's lesser than, and that looks like it's greater than. But pay attention to the background once you start seeing lots of movement happening. Notice that the EIS actually holds the background together a little bit better, but the color is a little richer on the OIS system because it's a better camera. It's got better color processing. So this holds the background together a lot better. This holds the color contrast and so forth together a lot better and holds the subject together better. So you can see that the differences aren't huge, but this is also flown on the helmet of a competent flyer. If this were jerking around a whole lot more, we'd see a whole lot more mess. But one thing to notice is, for instance, now we've lost some of the detail here, and the camera is actually oversaturating. It's creating some false color that's not real. But notice how we do have pretty clean lines for the most part through here, but we've got some little ghosting things that appear wherever there's a high amount of flutter. A little bit of ghosting that starts showing up, and it's better or worse in different frames. We could randomly pick any number of frames, but you want to try and avoid EIS as sort of the baseline of what I'm saying. You want to avoid OIS if you can at the baseline. That said, if you are going to fly with an OIS camera system, strongly consider a flat top helmet, not a chin cup type helmet, because they simply don't hold as tightly. And more importantly than that, the mind warp type of helmet or the optic type of helmet is a lot more prone to the helmet shaking and moving because it's affected by the burble of your body, where a flat top pro type of a helmet is less prone to that because it has a large flat surface that that kind of acts like a vacuum. So you have a little bit less of an issue with it. You can't eliminate it completely. It's just something to be aware of. Again, it comes back down to you being a flying camera platform. The more solidly you can fly, the better your picture's going to be. Make sense? All right, can I get somebody to turn on the lights back there? Questions? I have a whole bunch of toys and stuff up here. I'm happy to answer whatever I can as best I can.
Memory cards.
Memory cards. Oh, memory cards. Great question. What's your question? Then I'll say something about them.
What do you recommend with the CX100?
You've got to have a Class 2 or higher memory card. And I highly recommend that you not go on eBay and buy memory cards. There are a lot of counterfeit cards out there, guys. Lots of them. And it's really easy to end up with a counterfeit card that's either A, incompatible, or B, really isn't a high-speed class card. Stick with name brands, and I recommend, as much as it sucks, either buy them from a store or go to a reputable dealer like B&H or Z-Reis. I'll give you a hint. If you call this place called Z-Reis, ZREISS.com, go there. Don't order online. Pick up the phone, call the phone number, and ask for a guy named Charlie. Tell him you're a skydiver. Tell him you know me. And Charlie will give you a great deal on cards if you buy 2 or more. I don't get any kickback. I'm just telling you this is a favor. ZREISS.com, ZReis.com. They also sell Raynox lenses, by the way, too. If you want to look at a Raynox 30-30 or a Raynox 50-50 lens for your HD camcorder, they've got them. Next.
How big?
More. Oh, how big?
We already discussed that.
For skydiving at this drop zone, I'm going to recommend you get 2 gig cards, not 8 gig cards, not 16 gig cards. You're going to come down off a skydive. The editing system that we have here at Elsinore now is fully automated. You're going to pop your card in, you're going to grab another card, you're going to go back on, you're going to do a back-to-back. And you're going to be up on the next load. If you have a 2 gig card, it's less data to be transferred, and you're less likely to want to fill the card up. You're going to, because a 2 gig card is only going to last you for a couple of skydives. So if you have a smaller card, and they're cheaper, 2 gig cards, if you can even find them now, 2 gig cards are going to cost you about $12 for a Memory Stick Pro Duo Class 2 card. So, in fact, if it's an MSPD card, a Memory Stick Pro Duo, it's a Class 2 card, Pro Duo.
That's for the
I
deal,
believe
okay?
for the people that are working here that are using these cameras, Lob and the Drop Zone is going to be supplying us with cards once we kick into the system. He's talking about getting us each 10, so every time we come down, we can just hand them off.
That's the idea. If you can picture the system working this way, you have an inbox, a process box, an out box, and a DVD to student box. So you come down off the jump, put your card here, the editor knows that that's in the inbox, takes the card out, sucks it in the computer, puts it in the process box. You come down off your jump, you take that card out of the process box, put it into your camera, you go back up on the next jump as you drop the last card off into the inbox. You're constantly cycling 2 cards all day long. And my recommendation to the Drop Zone is they have 3 cards. Cards do, once in a green moon, fail. Not very often, but they do fail. And so it's a good idea to have a 3rd card there, just a backup. But you'll constantly be cycling 2 cards. 1 in, 1 out. And as you're doing this, guys, it's important that you not delete files from your cards. Format your cards. Don't delete them. Every time you delete information from a hard drive or from a memory card or anything like that, you actually leave little tiny bits of what was there before. And I call them mouse droppings. If a mouse gets into the wall of your house and takes a crap, eventually those mouse droppings start to build up and the wall starts to stink and maybe it falls apart. Well, it's that way with this little stuff. Your card fills up with all these little mouse droppings and eventually it becomes corrupt. If you format, that will never ever happen. Format's like a clean scrub. And it actually takes longer to delete than it takes to format. Delete takes several key presses, where format is 1 key press on all the camcorders, whether it's CX100, CX110, or 150 or 500, whatever you have.
Anything on importing?
I'm sorry, importing. Thank you. I'm sorry, Glenn, I completely spaced that. Who's using Mac? Okay, a few of you. All right, everybody else using PC? Yeah, you're in transition, I know. That's what boot camp is for. Obviously, I use both, but I'm using the PC side of my computer right now. If you're using a Mac and you're working with AVCHD or MPEG-2, the program you're probably using is more than likely either iMovie or Final Cut Studio, maybe Final Cut Pro. None of these applications, in fact, none of the Apple applications support AVCHD or any MPEG variant natively, period. If speed workflows are how you want to work, unfortunately, Mac is not the way to go, because Mac has to convert everything. We call it a transcode. When you ingest anything in an Apple system, it has to be transcoded to something else. Apple likes it to be transcoded to one of 2 codecs. Either it goes to Apple Intermediary Codec, which is AIC, or it goes into Apple's own ProRes. It's a proprietary codec, ProRes. If you are going to ingest this content into a Mac, I recommend you always ingest as ProRes. The reason being is because AIC is not shareable across network systems, and it can't function within the PC environment. So if you ever have to share a file with a PC, you're hosed. But if you convert to ProRes, it'll read on both PCs and Mac systems jointly, and it loads into everything. One of the reasons this might be important is maybe the news media has come to your Drop Zone and they want media off your computer or off of your camera. You need to ask them, what are you using? Are you using Final Cut, using Premiere, using whatever? Now, Adobe Premiere does support AVCHD natively, and it does run on the Mac, by the way. So with Premiere, you can natively do it. This Drop Zone is moving to Sony Vegas. The reason that they're moving to Sony Vegas is not only because it's a really easy to learn, low learning curve software tool, but it's fully automated. What's going to happen literally is you're going to come down off a jump, pull the card out of your camera, put it into the computer will automatically suck the data off. You don't have to do anything. The computer sucks the data from your card, puts it onto the computer. It then edits the timeline complete with certain stock media that the Drop Zone is going to be using, of things like airplanes taking off and some aerial footage flying around the Drop Zone, things like that. It will pre-edit all of that for you. We will be delivering DVDs from the moment the card is taken off of the camera to the moment we hand the student a DVD is as little as 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
Vegas 9 Pro's doing that?
Vegas 9 Pro. It uses a software tool called Production Assistant. Myself and a guy named John Refrano, we're the two designers of that system. A guy named Chris Warnock helped develop the system around which it works. So it was developed for the professional broadcast industry, but we saw a specific benefit to the action sports industry, whitewater rafting, gliding, skydiving, etc. Things where it's a super fast turnaround. So we developed a system through which, when you put the card in, it edits it for you. That means lower learning curve for the editor, faster turnaround time to the customer.
Which is the key.
Magic. It's really cool.
Now they want to know that because they're struggling with Vegas 9 and they're doing it manually and they're still trying to make 20-minute calls. And to do it this automated way is something that, I mean, I just left a seminar with a bunch of guys in Texas from the ranch and from Florida and from a bunch of other DZs that don't know this. And they've been playing with this software for the last 6 months. So,
If they just pick up the phone and ask, we show them.
yeah, I'm going to send you your link.
I'm headed back. I'm headed to Jumptown, and I'm headed back to Massachusetts to show Jumptown and Pepperell how to use the system next week with Dave Brown. And yeah, it's easy to find me. Moderator on DropZone.com. I'm the green guy, but so I'm easy to find. But anyway, I'm happy to help you guys with it. And there's a lot of training tutorials on the web about how to use Production Assistant. But you need that tool. It's $160.
We actually, that's what we were just doing this in Corpus Christi. A whole bunch of us were having seminars. Ash White, a bunch of guys from, no names, just people that were, and they were using the Production Assistant just for the auto ducking. They were trying to
And that's
auto
it?
duck. And that's it. And they're like, oh yeah, Production Assistant's a great tool, auto ducking. And that's all we knew. And what you're telling me now is like, oh, wait, we got something that we don't even know we have.
Wow, that's like using a gold-plated hammer to
Yes.
smash a fly or something. That's just not even close.
Can you show Vegas on the Mac?
You want me to show you Vegas on the Mac? Sure. It's going to come up on the screen up there.
You're running Windows on the Mac.
I'm running Windows on my Mac, yeah. Using Boot Camp. Yeah, Vegas doesn't run natively on the Mac, unfortunately.
You have to have, Windows?
You have to have the Boot Camp partition. So while I call this up, anybody got any last questions before we finish up for the night?
I walked out right when you said the best lens for tandem.
Darn, I forgot. A 0.5 lens. It could be a Raynox, or it could. Oh, let me tell you one thing about lenses, real quick, since we're here. There are two types of HD lenses. There are multi-element lenses, which is what this is, and that's why it's a really big. It's a big housing, big head on it, right? And then there are single element lenses, like this one. Big difference in size, right? This has 2 pieces of glass, this has 1 piece of glass. This type of a lens you can zoom through because it has multi-elements. This is a single element, no zoom. One really cool thing about this type of a lens is if you're using a HiPi, if you've got a HiPi system, the HiPi, if you use the HiPi Pro, the HiPi Pro actually has a feature in it that will lock your lens into a specific zoom depth. So, in other words, if you've been playing with your camera and you accidentally messed with the zoom or whatever, whenever you turn on the HiPi Pro, it will automatically put your camera at the correct zoom depth.
That only works for the single element lens, you said? Or
No, because it's camera based.
HiPi Pro?
Yeah, it's camera based. If you have the small HiPi D, this is called the HiPi D. If this is all you have is the D, then the D is just an indicator and it doesn't. Yeah, all it's going to give you is just the light when you turn that thing on. And so that's
out huge because before we could do that, there was a lot of videos where you come down and your camera got bumped, or you have other instructors on the plane playing a joke on you, and you get down and it zoomed all the way in on the student's face.
Oh, no.
It happened to me on my first jet.
oh really?
You're trying to get a landing before.
Yeah.
That's always fun, hey?
That CX100 is so easy to bump that thing. And,
Yeah, it is. You really want to have a good housing for it. I highly recommend
it
it.
takes a few
You.
extra seconds on startup, so instead of starting your camera right when you're at the door, you got to start it a few seconds before, but it's a huge insurance. It's nice.
Yeah. Anyway, back to your question. So what should you buy? Depends on what your budget is. If you can buy a multi-element lens and you want something you can zoom through, the Raynox 50-50 or 50-52, a really good lens. If you don't need zoom through, then I'm a huge fan of, this is the newer Century Optics 0.5. It's a little big, it's the same size as the Baby Death or the Optica, but I'll tell you what, thing is just sweet. It's an spherical lens, so it flattens things out so they don't look quite so fat and ugly. They look a lot more natural. And that, again, that's, you know, that's important. I don't know that everyone here is shooting tandems, but if you are, again, I just can't say this enough times. Tandem video is about the student. It's not about us. You know, please try and keep that in mind. Because God, I sure see a lot of, I'm sure you see it too, a lot of crappy tandem video out there where students are big noses, and if you fly off to the side, their nose gets longer, and you know, their ears get huge and things like that. And that's just, and the other thing is, if you're shooting a woman that's well endowed and you're shooting on her face, you're putting your breasts at the bottom end of the lens, and all of a sudden her most prized asset is shrunk. Check it out. You'll notice. You'll shrink those things down. Anyway.
In other words, shoot the right there.
What's that? Oh, comment? All right. Anything else, guys? Thanks for hanging out and listening to my bullshit. Fun to share what I know. Anyway, you can always find me here on the Drop Zone or dsc@dropzone.com, or come to the photo forum on dropzone.com, or go to the VAST, V-A-S-S-T website. If you go to the VAST website, by the way, there's over 400 free video training tutorials that'll show you how to use Production Assistant or Vegas or some of this camera stuff. I teach a lot of that kind of thing. This is what this is actually what I do for a living, is create training materials. Yeah, video, audio, software support training. Okay, thanks guys.